Welcome to Cancer and Peace, everyone. My name is Sean Stewart, and I'm going to facilitate our conversation today with my good friend, Peter Scalzo. Jack is doing some special mastering on my voice today to make me sound just a little different. I think he wanted to hear a different quality today. So you can blame him for what you're hearing today. And he's going to be actually managing the cough button also. But we're going to have a conversation about endurance and the importance of endurance in your journey of peace in cancer. And so I happen to know that Peter has prepared an entire message on this, that by the time this podcast releases, will have been spoken in front of probably a few thousand people at this time. And so he's got a lot to share on this. So he's going to drive the conversation, and I'm going to get to chip in a little bit here. So kick us off, Peter.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, you're going to have to chip in on this. I think, and so the listeners, you should know that Sean is just getting over COVID, and that's why he sounds the way he does. So if he goes into a coughing fit, that's the reason for it. He is not contagious. That's why I'm here with him. But we want to talk about this topic of endurance, and it's something that I have recently spent time with and poured myself into as I've been asked by the church that I attend to actually share about this and share how it relates to my cancer journey, because for me, I am entering my 18th year of this cancer journey, which began in 2005. And so many of you know from my resume the reason why endurance is applicable to this journey, and it's has over the 18 years. My resume includes 15 surgeries, mostly major, and one described as the most extensive done in urology. But it's involved like 6 recurrences and 7 years of immunotherapy treatments. It became metastatic in 2015, and countless procedures, tests, scans, and twice being told to go home and call hospice care. But I think one of the features of my journey with cancer has been that there hasn't been a let up, that it's been a constant spiral, actually just a constant journey, a constant path of not being able to step outside of the cancer space. And that's unusual from my own experience with interacting with cancer patients. Usually they receive surgery, they get treatment, and they might have a recurrence later, but they're pretty much done with the cancer treatment and the cancer journey. If they're a cancer survivor, of course, but if they don't get a recurrence, or someone who gets diagnosed and it's a terminal diagnosis right away, and that person lasts so long and then passes on. So to sort of have somebody who's just dwelling in a metastatic cancer space, and I've asked my oncologist, when can I stop the immunotherapy treatment, the systemic treatment that goes throughout my body, and she just said, you're in uncharted territory, you're an anomaly. We're not used to people with your cancer cell living. But our data shows that if you stop the treatment, the cancer comes back. So I'm in this like catch-22 where I have to continue my treatment, and the future is unknown. It's uncertain. I have no idea if I can ever stop the treatment. If I do, is this, will the cancer come back right away? Is it terminal? I just don't know the answer to those questions. But I think what it's meant for me is, how do I do life in a metastatic cancer space every day, day after day, month after month, year after year? I think that's been the issue of endurance. How do you do that? And so currently the church that I'm attending is going through the Hall of Faith chapter. It's from Hebrews 11th chapter. It starts out by defining what faith is. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And then it goes through all these champions of faith, all the greats from these scriptures. And there's one portion in the chapter where it talks about when things don't go so well, where people are martyred for their faith, and they're living in caves, that kind of, it's just a one of those situations that one has to endure. And I don't know. And so the definition of endurance, it's actually defined pretty much in Scripture, but it says that endurance means patience under suffering. So that's the definition for endurance. Persistence is a sister word, which means to basically exist in the face of difficulty, but not to give up, sort of thing. And so I think the issue for me is, in this cancer space, is how do I have patience while I'm suffering and going through in the middle of an 18-year cancer journey?
That's a great definition, patience under suffering. And so endurance seems like one of the most important things that we're going to need to do. And I'm actually curious because we're I feel like in a cultural moment where endurance is being downplayed, not emphasized, because there's this idea of avoiding suffering as if there's not great purpose in it. And from your story, I think what I've recognized in a big way is that great peace has come out of the going through the suffering, is the entering into it. But I think there's an opposite message that's being played in culture. It is to stop suffering. There's not purpose in it. And there's a huge kind of discussion about once there's too much suffering, why not just end it all, or just throw the towel in. And I actually don't want to make a big argument there, but I think what I'm hearing from you is that there's deep purpose in this endurance time.
And so a passage from Scripture that I'm going to talk about in my message is James chapter 1, verses 2-4, but it's really just a wonderful paradox, but truth in the Scriptures. And it says brothers and sisters. That's how it starts out. So in other words, all of us who have surrendered our lives to Jesus, it basically says that consider it all joy when trials of any kind come your way. So there's this choice to make about, considering something to be joy linked up with trials, and trials of any kind. And it really talks, and then it says the why. The why is because those trials and enduring through those, that produces endurance. And then the Scripture does something very interesting. It says that when that endurance sort of matures, it says you will be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. So there's this maturing concept to us as people and as Christ followers because of endurance. And so I believe it's a high value concept that God has. And later on in James, Job is praised for being a man of endurance. I mean, that's what it says. It doesn't say he was a loving man or kind man. It says he was a man of endurance, and he's praised for that.
Can I play Job's three friends for a second?
Yeah.
Dude, you've gone 18 years. Yeah. So you must have really been immature and needed a lot of work on this maturing thing.
That's true.
That's how Job's friends would encourage, right?
Yeah.
Sorry. We like to pick on each other a little bit. That's an important, I'm curious, I'm going to cough again. How is it that you get to endurance, though? I'm just thinking about my own journey, and in my mind as we were thinking about this topic a little bit, and I went back a few years and I thought about, like, even in a career where there were struggles, or marriage, like the number of times that I felt like quitting. And actually, I shouldn't say it that way. The number of times that I actually did quit, if not internally, externally, on the journey, the hard parts. And And I found, I was thinking back too, that there were times when I felt like it, but I kept going.
Yeah.
And there always seemed to be some gold at the end that if I
Yeah.
would have chosen that road of quitting, that I would have missed that gold.
Right.
And that's happened here in this current
Yeah.
ministry space. But it's happened in so many areas of my life. But once I went through, the times I did go through and endure,
Mhm.
there was something of real value at the end.
Yeah.
And circumstances were always a poor indicator of reality, as our buddy Johnny D like to say.
Right.
That reality always looked different than what the circumstances were pointing to. And it was just my lack of understanding in that. Anything you want to share in that, in that context related to that, your own journey, the gold, what it was necessary to endure.
Yeah. I think for the cancer space, it's the endurance is linked up with really I have no other choice. The cancer is not something within my control at all. And I've spent 36 years in a marriage, and the marriage ended. And I chose to be part of ending it because that was, I believe, to be the healthiest thing to do at that point. But I endured up to that point to try to see if reconciliation was possible and those kinds of things. But I think in the cancer space, I don't have any other choice. I can either be,
Because I think there might be something where,
mm-hmm.
because some people may hear this and it's like, well, I'm either going to take my life or I'm going to go through this.
Yep.
But I think we both know that inside of us there is a emotional giving up. There's a
right.
There's a form of giving up that's not life ending, but it is, you stop focusing on what's important and you kind of, maybe you withdraw and you pull back and you do bare minimums. Mm-hmm. And it's more like what you might see after trauma and depression. Mm-hmm. It's like you go to the least common denominator, the least of activity as a way of giving up. And I think what we're talking about here is, rather than that, it's still recognizing there's deep purpose and still being all in, still pushing all the chips of your life into the center of the table and just letting that play out where it may be. Is that a fair, the kind of middle ground thing we're probably talking about more often than not in this journey?
Yeah, I think so. I picked out two main features of endurance, which I think links up with what you're saying. And to me, the two main features of endurance are acceptance and purpose.
Yeah.
But folded within acceptance for me has been dealing with tough emotions. And I did want to give up. I did give up. I did. And it was after that November 2nd, 2015 surgery where everything was dark as dark can be. I wasn't supposed to live, 5% chance. I couldn't do recovery. I was just depressed and devastated and traveling in disillusionment with my faith even. It's like, where is God? What happened? Mm-hmm. And I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I'm done. I'm stopping. And so I wasn't at a place of acceptance. I was dealing with trauma, and I was frozen. I was in a freeze state with trauma. And it was waking up to the reality of my own emotions. In other words, giving myself permission to express those really tough emotions that started my enduring process. Endurance was birthed in those tough emotions, being able to express them. If I had to try to white knuckle that part of the journey, I would not have made it. I had to let go, recognize my powerlessness, and start expressing those tough emotions.
Yeah, I want to define that just a touch. I think that's what you described is super important and really and beautiful too at the same time. And prior to that letting go, you had to make a decision. Well, let me say it this way. I don't think people endure usually by themselves. that they have to have support in some manner. And so I like this idea of courage, but usually courage is combined with encouragement. And so I know that you had a friend that dropped a journal on your chest who
Right.
started that journey of encouragement
Right.
to help you do the digging. And you then relied on allowing yourself to express, like you might see in the Psalms, your real self to God. And this
Right.
was like those two living important beings were a part of your endurance because
Mhm.
on your own you weren't going to endure. If it was just a Peter Scalzo moment and there was nobody else there, you're probably still going to shrivel and die on the vine.
Right.
And so you had encouragement both from a good friend as well as God. And I know you told the story about your kids being there
Yeah.
and their support
Right.
were encouragement. Those were
Mhm.
really important family members that were there. And your brother, you had this support there that was encouraging you to
Right.
keep going, even though you didn't feel like it.
Right.
Because almost all of us get to that point where we don't feel like it, and our endurance requires encouragement for others.
Right.
And then that moves to where I think you were just describing the ability to get to
Yeah.
acceptance.
And just as an aside, something that that I'm thinking of right now, my son, who is currently a third year medical student right now, back then he was a young man, and he stayed with me and read scriptures and played hymns. But very interesting, now that I look back on it, he never tried to change my feelings. He accepted me. I remember him actually saying, "I get it, Dad. If you want to give up, I get it. I understand." But he wouldn't say, "But don't do that." He actually traveled, pretty wise for a young man. Yeah,
Most of us want to say, don't give up.
right. And I can remember laying there in bed thinking, "Wow, I was just given permission to just say that's it. I'm done." And but it felt good. It felt like, wow, okay,
Yeah.
he's accepting me where I'm at completely.
We're
It
gonna
was nice.
we're gonna do a podcast on Job coming up. That's one of the things I
Yeah,
want to talk about there was that
yeah,
Job took liberties to express his real feelings. I wish I had never been born.
yeah,
It'd have been better if, you know, I had never happened. All these really negative feelings.
yeah.
He got to the place of going, this isn't worth it. This isn't. I don't see the purpose in this.
Well,
And God
yeah.
didn't judge him for expressing his real feelings.
And it brings me back to something you did in our recovery ministry, which is just something I believe this is how I try to be with cancer patients. You did an exercise called incarnational listening, and it was all about active listening. So when someone speaks, I parrot back what they're saying, and I try to put myself in their shoes and really empathize and understand. But I don't do it in a way to give advice. I'm really listening to understand where they're coming from, and I parrot back, and then at the end I say, "Is there anything else you want to add to that?" And then at the very end I'll say, well, what's one takeaway you want me to walk away with? And it was really interesting because you taught it, and at that seminar, one of our buddies, you did an exercise where we could do that with each other, and he listened to me about my divorce,
Hmm.
and I was blown away at how loved I felt without someone trying to give me advice or fix me. And it was just this active listening. And I was like, wow, he loves me so much. He's letting me flesh this out and understand myself. And I think that's kind of what my son was doing for me without even knowing it. And like what you were just saying, he was letting me go through a process, but he wasn't trying to change that process. He was letting me flesh out my own stuff.
Before we get too far down the road, I do want to give credit where credit's due. That's Pete Scazzero's work in
That's
emotionally
right.
healthy
Yeah.
relationships. And so he teaches that emotionally healthy relationships, incarnational listening. And I have found it to be really powerful. We use it in a lot of areas in ministry. And I remember the first time I did a training for that. I used that tool that he gave us with a CR group, and we were doing it. And I remember we had husbands and wives that were sitting together, and and people that went around the room. And I remember the amount of tears
Mm.
that were shed because people felt deep emotion about being listened to.
Oh, gosh.
And so that's such an important part. I know it's maybe a little bit off topic, but I think this point about being encouraged and then tying that back to endurance is such an important part. And part of being encouraged is to be heard. And what I think I hear you saying is that you actually felt heard by your son,
Mm-hmm.
you felt heard by God,
Mm-hmm.
and not judged.
Yes. Powerful.
That's a great place to be.
Mm-hmm.
What about the other half of the equation? You put out 2 parts. So
You mean acceptance and purpose?
and purpose. Yeah, we talked about purpose in our last podcast
Right.
that you and I recorded together.
I think that acceptance is huge on one hand because of, it's a process to move to acceptance. And I'm not sure the percentage of people that actually get to acceptance because it requires us to move out of denial and accept reality. It requires us to not bargain with God anymore, which I did. I've done bargaining. Well, God, if you heal me, I'll speak out, all that kind of stuff.
Sure, you will.
It requires me to process sadness, right? And anger. Why is this happening to me? And fear, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And get to a place where I accept, okay, I am a cancer patient. But the interesting thing is then purpose. But that does not have to define me. My identity is in Jesus, and I struggle with cancer, right? And so how I do purpose in this talk is basically there's a Luke 8 story where the disciples are going to travel across the sea after a day of ministry, and Jesus goes to sleep in the boat. But the point about purpose in that is he purposefully directed them into that storm. And in it, they get a picture of where their faith is at,
Oh, yeah.
like where they're at.
Yes.
And Jesus does it so they can do an inward journey. They can look inside. And, the thing is, he calms everything and looks back and says, "Where is your faith?" But I think that to me is very symbolic of going through the storms of our lives, especially cancer. It's like God wants to use that storm so that we do an inward look,
Oh, my goodness.
inward journey. Yeah.
I just did the Abraham story with Isaac, and we took him to sacrifice. And it blew me away when I went through it this time again. And it's exactly what you said, is Abraham was given basically 2 choices that were both horrible. One was to disobey God and, go the other direction. The other one was to go sacrifice his son. And on the surface, it looks like God's testing him. But when I thought about it longer, I recognized, well, God already knew his heart. God wasn't testing him to find out what he would do. God was revealing to Abraham his own heart of trust.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing you're talking about, that God was wanting the disciples to see their own heart and where they trust at. And then it was such an encouragement because, we talked about a few seconds ago, the gold on the other side of endurance, like going through difficulty, because so much of the gold is getting to see how much God has grown you and what God, like that whole thing about perseverance and endurance,
Right.
and it births some really beautiful gifts. And
Right.
I'm gonna tie this to our podcast. I think it births peace, because once you have the recognition that God's using this so that he can reveal your real heart and you can see the gift of who he is in your life, it develops deep peace, because then you understand that you're actually in his hands.
Mm-hmm.
No matter, you said it earlier about your own journey with the endurance, that as you've gone down this road so many times, you asked the question, or your doctor asked the question, hey, do you want to do the PET scan before or after vacation?
Yeah.
And what was your response?
It is what it is. Let's just do it before. It doesn't matter.
And I redefined that of, you're saying, hey, I want to live in reality.
Right.
And it's okay to live in reality because you can trust God. And when you can trust God, you have real peace. And that's what we're talking about. Endurance moves you towards peace, because there's kind of like a chain reaction that happens here.
And I think back to James, because it's interesting. And I'd love to get your thoughts sometime on this, maybe not now, but where James says, and you will be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. When endurance has its fullness in you, or at least as full as it can be.
Mm.
And we're not talking about sinless perfection here, because Paul, even in the later years of his life, said, Jesus Christ came to sinners, of which I am the chief sinner. So we know it doesn't mean sinless perfection.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something that happens for us that God does in us to complete us, mature us through endurance. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that sometime.
Yeah, that's going to be a longer conversation.
Yeah.
But, I have lots of thoughts on that, but I
Yeah.
think that is a longer conversation.
Yeah.
And maybe it's worth us, doing an episode on just that.
Yeah.
The journey to perfection, so to speak, is a
And
way
I
of
think
thinking
it
about this.
ties in with, you always talk about a non-anxious presence.
A non-anxious presence.
I think that ties in with it.
Yeah, and one of the things that I say with non-anxious presence is, and this is an Edwin Friedman concept out of Failure of Nerve, and he would say that the greatest gift you can give in leadership is a non-anxious presence. But there's a recognition that I can't get to non-anxious presence just by sitting here saying, I'm not going to be anxious. I'm not going to be anxious. There actually has to be something that tells you, your body, your nervous system, to not be anxious. Yeah. And that comes with a deep, I think, trip of endurance and trust in God. And as you have a deep trust in Jesus, there's no reason to be anxious.
Right.
You can actually have a non-anxious presence.
Yeah.
But that's part of that journey. So this is one of the gifts of endurance, is a non-anxious presence.
And so just to circle back to acceptance and purpose, because I think purpose is on the backside of acceptance. Mm-hmm. And with acceptance, I have to deal with my emotions, my tough emotions, especially fear, anger, and sadness. And so I run them through. The thought process is, like, recently I've got to go for I had 2 surgical procedures, one in June and one in early July, just a couple weeks ago, mm-hmm. to try to get stents in. There was a blockage, to try to get kidney function back, all that. But the process is something like this. I'm scared about this procedure because there's a blockage, and it could likely be cancer again. And that I'm fearful about that, because I'm already on systemic treatment. There's barely any other options for me. This could become an end of life thing for me. I mean, that's the reality. And so I encourage myself to express those emotions, to get them out, mm-hmm. to not bury them, but express them out loud. And then I also then say to myself, well, what does God have to say? And I'm encouraged by the scriptures about it. But I'm also encouraged, you said at one time, that faith built on experience. I'm also encouraged by the fact that I've had so many times where there has been a recurrence, and God has just done amazing things in it, right? Mm-hmm. But that process of letting my emotion out, using scripture, what my higher power has to say, and of course prayer and silence and solitude and all that, but helps me to get to a point where I can endure, I can accept where I'm at. But I have to do that. I have to have that emotional journey.
It's quite a bit of detail on endurance for today.
Yeah.
And I want to just wrap us up here at this point, but I don't want to put a bow on it, because I think sometimes endurance leads to an end of life journey. But you and I have both talked about this quite a bit, is that they're end of life journeys that are where a race has been run well are one of the most beautiful experiences that you will see in your life. Mm-hmm. And that's not a bow per se, because it's painful. There's a lot of grief and loss that has to be processed. And, I think that's not something that should be underplayed. Mm-hmm. But I also do think that this concept that we've talked about, when you do endure, and you seek help. You see that you're not, you can't do this on your own, and you take the joy of that journey, all that you've learned in that there is something of deep purpose and value on the backside. I think that's what you were trying to get to with this idea of purpose shows up in endurance, that
Right.
you actually find purpose. And I think I found it in my own life, but I had to go through to find it. I could not know the purpose up front. I could have a general idea that there's purpose in suffering, but you don't know what that purpose is until you do the actual the time of suffering and endure through it. And so I've seen that in your life and journey. I've experienced many bouts of that in my own life, and I think that's the point, is that in that endurance and seeing the fruit of that, it's like the fruit of the Spirit. When you see the fruit of that, that endurance is worth running the race for. I think that's what I hear in your story. And so you're nodding your head, and we're in agreement that there's something big here on the journey of peace that comes from endurance. And 18 years is a lot, my friend. That's amazing to even think about the amount of suffering as is piled up through time. And you're sitting here today to tell everybody, but it has a purpose,
Right.
and it's deep and meaningful. And that's a word of encouragement for everybody that might be listening today.
Amen.
So thanks everyone for listening. You can get more resources at cancerandpeace.com. You can get Peter's book and even some links to emotionally healthy spirituality, which we referred to today, and many more. So we look forward to seeing you next time.
I know.